There's a protocol in every functioning government for the moment its leader is struck. The protocol exists not because governments expect their leaders to be targeted. It exists because the absence of visible, confirmed, unambiguous leadership in the immediate aftermath of a strike on a head of government produces something more dangerous than the strike itself. It produces a vacuum. And into a vacuum in wartime flows speculation, rumor, adversarial messaging, ally anxiety, and the specific kind of strategic paralysis that comes when the people who need to make decisions do not know whether the person who is supposed to authorize them is alive to do it. Iran's IRGC issued a statement on March 9th confirming that missiles had targeted Benjamin Netanyahu's office and the home of the Israeli Air Force commander, and that Netanyahu's fate, in the IRGC own words, was unclear. And then came silence. Not the silence of a government managing its communications carefully, and not the silence of a prime minister who is safe in a secure facility and choosing the right moment to appear publicly. It was the silence of wartime media restrictions implemented on February 28th that have created an information vacuum so complete that the most consequential question in Israeli politics, is the prime minister alive, cannot be answered with any certainty from outside the Israeli government's information perimeter. Where is Netanyahu? That question is hanging unanswered over a war that has already killed 67 Americans in Kuwait, struck the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, closed the Strait of Hormuz, pushed oil above $130 a barrel, fractured NATO between France and Spain, and sent American tankers fleeing from Saudi Arabia to Europe from Prince Sultan Air Base. That question is not a peripheral detail in this conflict. It is the question that every government with a stake in what happens next is asking its intelligence services to answer right now. Because if the answer is what Iran's IRGC is claiming, everything that follows changes. Let me be precise about what we know and what we do not know, because precision matters more than narrative in a situation this consequential. What we know Iran's IRGC claimed on March 9th that missiles struck Netanyahu's office and the home of the Israeli Air Force commander. Iran has made operational strike claims throughout this conflict that have subsequently been confirmed by satellite imagery and independent reporting, Ras Laffan, Ras Tanura, Jufair, the Thad radars, the Hyatt Hotel in Manama, and the bases in Kuwait, Iraq, and Jordan. Iran strike claims in this conflict have a higher confirmation rate than Iran strike claims have historically carried, and that is the operational baseline against which this particular claim lands. What we do not know Netanyahu's current condition. And the Israeli government has not produced a verified, time-stamped, unambiguous public appearance by the Prime Minister since the IRGC claim was issued. There are statements attributed to Israeli officials. There is government machinery continuing to function at an operational level. But there is no clean, confirmed "this is Netanyahu," alive and in command appearance that closes the question for the outside world. The information vacuum is real, the speculation it produces is real, and the strategic consequences of that vacuum are real regardless of what the underlying truth actually is. Now understand what Iran's targeting of Netanyahu's office means in terms that go beyond the physical damage. Even if the prime minister is confirmed safe and the strike caused limited structural damage, the targeting of a head of government's office in an active conflict is not a tactical military strike. It is a political act executed with military means. It is Iran telling Israel and telling every government currently watching this conflict that the decision maker who authorized the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, the man whose political survival has been intertwined with the prosecution of this conflict since before it formally began, is inside Iran's targeting calculus, not protected by distance, not protected by the security architecture that was supposed to make this kind of strike impossible, not above the conflict in the way that heads of government have historically been treated as above the direct physical consequences of the wars they authorize. Netanyahu authorized the war. The message does not require a confirmed kill to land with full force. The message is simply this: we know where you are. We can reach you, and the security perimeter that stands between you and our missiles is not the guarantee it was before March 9th. That message is received in Jerusalem, and it is also received in Washington, in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, and in every capital where a head of government has been watching this conflict and quietly calculating their own exposure. And now look at the fracture that has opened, because the allied fracture that has emerged between Washington and Jerusalem in the wake of these strikes may be more consequential than the strike on Netanyahu's office itself. The United States has one overriding priority this morning, and that priority is an exit strategy, not victory, not the elimination of Iranian military capacity, not regime change in Tehran. An exit strategy. A path out of a conflict that has pushed oil above $130 a barrel, killed 67 Americans in Kuwait, evacuated tankers from Saudi Arabia to Europe, fractured NATO between France and Spain, triggered sovereign wealth fund withdrawal discussions worth an estimated $2 to $3 trillion, and produced Goldman Sachs projections with no clean price ceiling in sight. Washington needs this war to end, and it needs it to end on terms that allow oil prices to come down, that allow the Strait of Hormuz to reopen for commercial traffic, that allow Gulf states to halt the sovereign wealth fund withdrawal discussions that are bleeding regional financial markets, and that allow the American military to return its THAAD systems from South Korea and its tankers from Europe and its overall regional posture to something resembling what it looked like before the first B-2 took off. Israel has a different priority entirely. Israel's priority is the elimination of Iran's military capacity, not a ceasefire, not a deal, and not a negotiated pause that leaves the IRGC intact, that leaves Iranian ballistic missile production continuing, and that leaves Iran with the residual capability to reconstitute its nuclear program within 18 months and its full strike capability within 36. Israel's entire strategic theory of this conflict is that the window opened by the American strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities must be extended into a comprehensive degradation of Iranian military power while the operational conditions exist, while American military assets are still in the theater, while Iranian air defense remains degraded, while the opportunity is real rather than theoretical. The disagreement between Washington and Jerusalem over further strikes on Iranian oil infrastructure is where this fracture became publicly visible. Israel wants to strike the Karg Island export terminal, the Abadan refinery, the South Pars gas field, the physical architecture of Iranian oil revenue that funds the IRGC, that funds the missile program, that funds Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthi operation in the Red Sea. Israel's argument is straightforward. Without those revenues, Iran cannot sustain the military capability that makes it dangerous, so strike the oil, starve the military, and end the threat permanently. Washington said no. Washington said no because striking Iranian oil infrastructure does the one thing that the American exit strategy cannot survive. It extends the supply shock in a direction from which there is no quick recovery. Oil above $130 is already politically unsustainable for an administration managing domestic energy prices, European allied pressure, and a global economy absorbing the Hormuz closure on strategic reserve drawdown. Iranian oil infrastructure struck means Iranian oil, approximately 1.5 million barrels per day, already partially sanctioned but still flowing through Chinese purchases, leaves the global market entirely. It means the supply shortfall already producing Goldman Sachs projections with no ceiling gets significantly larger. And it means $150 is no longer the worst case. Washington told Jerusalem that they are not striking Iranian oil infrastructure, that they need to end this, that they need a deal and prices down. Jerusalem responded that they did not start this war to leave Iran capable of doing it again. The cancellation of Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner's planned trip to Israel is the diplomatic punctuation mark on that disagreement. Witkoff is Trump's personal envoy. Kushner is family. These are not career diplomats whose travel schedules reflect bureaucratic priorities. These are the two people closest to Trump in the entire diplomatic architecture of this conflict. The people who were supposed to be managing the relationship with Jerusalem through the hardest passages of the campaign. Their trip was planned, their trip was canceled. That cancellation is not a scheduling conflict. It is Washington telling Jerusalem through the language of absent envoys that the relationship is under strain severe enough that it cannot be managed in person right now. The disagreement over Iranian oil infrastructure strikes is public. The gap between exit strategy and elimination strategy is real, and the two people Trump trusted to bridge that gap have been stood down from the attempt. The U.S.-Israel alliance, the most durable, most institutionally embedded, most publicly proclaimed bilateral relationship in American foreign policy, is experiencing a fracture that is visible to every government watching this conflict this morning, and Iran is watching it carefully. Iran's IRGC statement on Netanyahu's office was not only a military announcement, it was a calculated wedge, Iran recognizing that the combination of Netanyahu's uncertain public status, Israeli domestic politics under wartime conditions, and the U.S.-Israel disagreement over strike objectives creates the maximum possible pressure on the alliance at exactly the moment it is most strained. If Netanyahu is confirmed incapacitated, or worse, if Israeli leadership transitions under active wartime conditions, the coherence of Israeli military decision-making becomes uncertain at precisely the moment Washington is trying to impose restraint on Israeli strike objectives, while Jerusalem is resisting that restraint. The vacuum is the weapon, not just the missiles that created it, but the information vacuum, the uncertainty, the days of unanswered questions about the prime minister's status that fill the global information space with speculation that Iran amplifies that adversaries exploit, and that allied governments have to manage without clean answers from an Israeli government operating behind wartime media restrictions. Every hour that the question, where is Netanyahu, remains publicly unanswered is an hour that Iran's narrative, we targeted him. His fate is unclear, occupies the space that Israeli confirmation would otherwise fill. Every hour is an hour of allied anxiety of Washington, uncertainty, and of the specific diplomatic paralysis that comes when the counterpart on the other end of the phone may not be the decision maker you actually need them to be. The cancellation of Witkoff and Kushner's trip lands in that hour. American strategy needs an exit. Israel needs an elimination. Netanyahu's status is unclear. The envoys are not going. The fracture is public. The oil is above $130. And somewhere in the information vacuum, the Allied fracture, the diplomatic cancellation, and the IRGC's claim is the shape of where this conflict is actually going next, not toward the clean, decisive, bounded American air campaign that the first B-2 strike was supposed to represent, but toward the scenario that every serious analyst has been naming privately for days. A conflict that ends not when one side defeats the other, but when the accumulated weight of cost, American political, Israeli, strategic, Gulf, economic, European energy forces a negotiated outcome that nobody wanted, and where the side that can hold the longest gets the most out of whatever deal eventually gets made. Iran is holding America as looking for an exit. Israel is fighting the exit. Netanyahu's office has been struck. And the question that sits at the center of all of it, the question the information vacuum will not answer cleanly, is whether the man who started this war is still in a position to decide how it ends. Where is Netanyahu? The world is waiting for the answer.